Hello and welcome to Midwest Writers Room. Our mission is to encourage, educate, and celebrate writers of the Midwest. I'm Luella Schmidt.
And I'm Ken Humphrey. Today's chapter break episode features Maxine Rosaler, and her latest publication, The Missing Kidney and Other Stories, came out from Delphinium Books in May of 2025.
Maxine is the author of the novel in stories Queen for a Day, Delphinium Books in 2018, which was nominated for the Kirkus Prize. The Jewish Book Council selected it as one of the 10 recommended fiction books in 2021. Her work has appeared in Prairie Schooner, Ticken, The Southern Review, Glimmer Train, Witness, Fifth Wednesday, and other literary journals. Her stories have been cited in Best American Short Stories and Best American Essays. Her latest collection, The Missing Kidney and Other Stories, received a starred Kirkus review and was named one of Oprah Daily's best summer reads of 2025.
Wow, nice kudos
Yeah.
there. Let's take a look at this publication. The Missing Kidney and Other Stories is set in New York City during the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. The collection vividly captures the city's sidewalks, streets, and subways, with cameo appearances by the people Maxine's characters encounter in the course of their days and nights.
I'm excited to talk about this one. Maxine, welcome to Midwest Writers Room. How you doing today?
Hi there. Hi.
All right. So let's dive right into this book. Generally, we'll ask what the origin story is of a book, but quite often when it's memoirs or collection short stories, it's a little bit more difficult to trace. Um, let's just ask you kind of then, how did this collection come about? I mean, is this something that took many years of short stories coming together?
Well, that's for sure. It took many years. I would say that this collection is my life's work. Okay. These stories span a period of 40 years, and most of them take place. I wrote most of them when I was in my 30s and 40s. I'm now 74 years old, which is hard to believe. And a few of the stories I wrote later, but most of them were written then, and they do very much capture the city at that time in the 1970s and early 80s. A lot of them are autobiographical, and some of them are based on people I know. And every now and then I come up with an idea for a story that I completely make up. But most of my stories are autobiographical or based on people I know. And actually, lately, I'm thinking I'm really sick of writing about myself, so I'm going to start interviewing people for other stories.
So are you
Yeah,
still in
that's
New
it.
York today at this
Ex-
moment? Are you
Excuse
still in
me?
New York? Are you
Oh,
still in New
yes,
York today?
I'll always be here. Yes.
All
I have
right.
a great apartment in Washington Heights, and my landlord would love to get me out, but he never will.
So without, releasing any spoilers from your book, can you kind of compare New York 1970s to the way it is today? Just in broad strokes, what differences have you really seen?
Oh, well, there's so much has changed. All the bookstores are gone practically, except for the Strand, possibly. I mean, the Strand is there, and very few bookstores. All the little restaurants that we used to love to go to are gone. But somehow the city survives. And I think the city survives because of this ineffable energy that exists within the city. I guess because of all the different kinds of people who live here. And so it's surprising that it does survive. And after like during the pandemic, I'd walk down the streets and it was just completely empty. And all of a sudden the city is back to life. Most notably, I would say, well, one of the notable differences is 42nd Street. One of my stories takes place in 42nd Street before it was sanforized and Disneyfied by, I think it was Giuliani. Now it's all no peep shows anymore, no sex shops, stuff like that. But I actually, for one of my stories, what was it? It's called Happiness now. I've gone through a lot of different changes there. That takes place in a peep show with Chicks for Dicks. That's what the name of the place was. And I actually went to interview the people there. And at the end of the interview, I went with my husband and my then boyfriend, now husband. And one of the chicks with dicks asked my husband, "Is she for real?" So I thought that was pretty cool. But so that was a lot of fun. So I love it when I have to interview people for stories, and sometimes I do that.
Nice. So you do have a connection back to Wisconsin, even though you've been in New York City for a long time. Care to share with us what that is?
Yeah, right. My choice of colleges was very random. And actually, I went to Wisconsin, basically because I met someone on a plane back from Italy with my parents, which was their graduation present for me and my sister. And he said that that was a good school, and so I just applied there. But actually, ironically enough, I only applied to schools that did not require a personal essay, which is really pretty funny because I could not imagine what to say about myself. I had no idea who I was or what to say about myself. And here you are. I'm such an autobiographical writer, but that's the way it is. I guess it takes a while for things to gestate. And I can go on about gestation if you like. Would you like me to go on about that?
I would, just for a minute.
Okay. Okay. Well, anyway, I would say that all my life I wanted to be a fiction writer. Ever since I was in third grade, I wrote my first novel, and then my parents guessed the ending, and I was so humiliated that I didn't write anymore. Okay. And then I met my husband when I was 32, I guess, and I just finally started writing my first short story. All my life, things were going around in my head, but I never had the nerve to write them down. But I do believe a lot of times I look back on my past with regret. But now I sort of see that having always earned my living as a writer, I was really honing my craft. And so then when I got down to write, I had my voice and then I also had my craft. So maybe it wasn't such a waste of time after all. What can I say? Sometimes I look at things with a very optimistic point of view, and other times when I'm in a dark mood, everything is bleak and horrible.
Oh, absolutely the same.
Yes. We're not
Well, so you,
bipolar, though. That's just the way people are.
that is just the way people are. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So tell us a little bit about the path to publication for this book. What was it? What did it take a long time? How did you go about it?
Well, okay. Well, first, I had tried, I tried various publishers for and agents for the collection. But as you know, short story collections are very taboo now. No one wants to publish short story collections, which I really don't understand because the short attention span, it seems like short stories would be ideal for this day and age. Um, and then I had actually given this publisher my collection. First, and they, finally I found this publisher through a very close friend of mine, Marion Thurm, and I really don't think if it had been for her that this book, I don't know if I would have broken through to the editors because there's a wall of silence between writers and publishers and editors.
Of course
But
you can.
anyway, so I had actually sent them this collection, okay, and he decided that the collection of stories about my son, my experience as the mother of as a mother of a child with autism would be what they would be more interested in. I kind of regret it because I think that this would have been a best first one because I think that Queen for a Day, which is my collection about the mothers of children with autism, it's very autobiographical. I think a lot of people maybe thought this was a book written by the mother of a child with autism and not a writer. So I don't think that it was taken as seriously as it should have been, although it was well reviewed. But what can I say? Can we really get involved in the business that much? It's such a waste of energy and time.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. That's true.
Yeah, it's
So,
really, what are you gonna do? I mean, I feel like it's such a gift to be a writer. To be able to write and to have that whole other life. I feel like it's almost like you get a chance to live your life over and over and over again. And what a privilege that is. And so I'm not going to really get myself tied up in knots about the publishing world. I mean, we are talking about publishing now, although I can say that I did submit my first book, Queen for a Day, to my husband's agent. He had this very high-powered literary agent. And when she rejected it, I was devastated. But that was really because that book was about my experience so much. And so it just felt like it was so personal.
Hmm. Yeah, it's hard to
So I've
separate
had,
sometimes.
and what can I say? I've had a lot of stories published in literary quarterlies. And I can tell you that, what can I say? I'm not a cynical person, but I have a pretty cynical perspective on the whole publishing industry. I've had stories accepted with rave reviews, by the same editor, who rejected it, or maybe it was just stuck in the slush pile and rejected by some anonymous reader 7 years before. So, if we're speaking to writers now, I just want to tell all you writers out there, don't take it too seriously.
Yeah. So when you were writing your collection, did you have any struggles or notable moments that stick out to you when you were putting this together when you were writing it originally?
Oh, some stories really killed me. They really killed me. And I was just writing, in some other answer that I wrote to something else, some other, outlet, that I was really hoping that that was gone for me forever. Writer's block, right? And I can tell you that yes, it's hell on earth, and it hasn't happened for a long time, but it did happen to me recently. Um, and I can say that I can pinpoint a story in my, Queen for a Day collection, which gave me a lot of trouble. And that was a story, and a lot of those stories, all those stories are autobiographical. And that story was based on this, advocate I had hired who completely screwed me out of $80,000 that I had borrowed, right? Um, and I hated her so much that I just couldn't break through to writing that story, in any way that it would come across as fiction. And you can't, and as a fiction writer, you can never hate anyone completely. You always have to show another side. So for that story, the way I broke through, the problems I was having with it was interviewing a woman and, who had a disabled child, and this advocate herself had a disabled child. And so I interviewed her, and she was so generous, and her story was so amazing. And so I gave that story to the lead character, who I called Teresa Thompson. And I can tell you also anecdotally, okay, I really hated this woman, okay, really hated her because she treated me with such arrogance and such disrespect. And years later, I actually got to sue her for $2,000. And, so I sort of got, I'm not a vengeful person, but boy, did I want something back from that woman. So I got that story and I got my $2,000. The struggle,
No,
it never stops, I think, for all writers. Um, you sometimes you think you've just got it made, and then all of a sudden, what the hell am I going to say? And then sometimes the things you write sound so stupid that you feel like throwing up. And other times you think that they're so great, and then someone else reads them and they say, no, this doesn't really work. So you always really need another reader, I think. Also, writers really need readers.
so Luella, note to self, let's not get on the wrong side of Maxine here. All right.
No, no,
That's
no.
right.
On the contrary, get on the wrong side of me, because I'm not a vengeful person at all. But this one incident was my only act of revenge in my lifetime. Okay. And boy, did she deserve it. And I called the story of Annie Sullivan, okay? And so the reason, it's within the context in the story I write about this. I'm so naive, and I really believe in the goodness of people. I'm so stupid. But anyway, so this woman had a disabled child, and on the wall neck outside her office was a story of Annie Sullivan. And it was such a beautiful story, about Annie, about, finding Annie Sullivan, and, seeing her in her, the terrible conditions in which she lived. And so I glommed on to believing that because this woman had a disabled child, that she would be sympathetic to the needs of other mothers. And I glommed onto that, for a very long time, which, if you don't mind me making another segue, brings me to, a major theme of mine, which is denial. And I really do focus on that a lot in many of my stories.
All right. Well,
Nice.
that's actually a very good segue then into the reading. Luella, should we?
Yeah, absolutely. Maxine, whenever you're ready, it is time to share with us and our listeners an excerpt and tell us where in your book or what you're specifically reading to orient our listeners.
Okay, so this is from my first story, the title story, The Missing Kidney, which is a it's kind of a coming of age story. And it has a lot of different elements to it. But one of the elements is my search for a job when I first came to the city. And feeling very out of place. And I'd always wanted to live in the city. It was my dream, my lifelong dream. And so here I am. In this excerpt that I've chosen is me going through the interview process. Every interview at an employment agency began with a typing test. Once I was so flustered I forgot to put paper in the typewriter, and I typed my 35 words a minute onto a bewildered, endlessly revolving black cylinder. One wet and rainy day, I walked down the streets of Midtown Manhattan with a newspaper draped over my head. I'd never owned an umbrella. The idea of buying one had never occurred to me. And that afternoon, the rainstorm that had promised all week long came thundering down. Realizing the futility of the New York Times that was disintegrating in my hands, I stood on the sidewalk with my eyes turned up toward the magnificently raging sky, and I allowed myself to get totally soaked. I started to sing and dance my way down the street in revolt against the job hunting shoes that pinched my feet and the job hunting dress that made me feel so ugly and sexless. But then the rain stopped and the sun came out, and I started to panic at the thought of what was to become of me with no job and no money. I made my way to the next employment agency on my list. I don't know what I could have been thinking, going there with water dripping down the ends of my hair and into my eyes. Perhaps like the beggar I had seen earlier that day, sitting in his wheelchair with the bare stumps of his legs exposed, I just wanted someone to take pity on me. My anxiety over my search for a job turned me into a compulsive masturbator, and my first stop at every employment agency was always the bathroom, which was usually located down a dark, ugly hallway and accessed by a key attached to a heavy block of wood. Afterward, in the brief but blessed afterglow of my glorious release, I would sit with the other applicants, all of us with brown clipboards and pale green application forms in our laps. The employment counselors, I think that's what they called themselves, were always women. And when it was my turn, I would follow the clickety-clack of their high heels down the corridor to a room full of metal desks, where they would tell me that with my lack of experience, I would be lucky to get whatever I was offered. Those meetings always left me feeling that youth was something to be ashamed of, something to be disposed of as quickly as possible. Despite everything, I put on a terrific show. And it wasn't long before I found my first real job, which was answering letters to the readers of Parade magazine. I had my own office. There was no window and no door. It was more of an alcove than an office, but it was all mine. And having been hired by the head of the personnel department, as far as I could see, I had no boss. I would sit in my tiny office writing long, heartfelt responses to readers' questions. In reply to a woman who asked how the magazine got its ideas for articles, I wrote that for the most part, they came from other magazines. Once a reader wrote to thank Parade for having run a story about a woman who'd given up her career as a school teacher to take care of her ailing mother, because that was exactly what she had done. I wrote back and told her that although I thought it was admirable what she was doing, the story was mostly made up, and she shouldn't use a fictitious magazine article to justify throwing her life away. You have only one life, I reminded her. Only one life. Sometimes I would have to go through back issues and send copies to the readers. The recipes, which usually included canned soup manufactured by one of the magazine's advertisers — mushroom soup was a big favorite — were especially popular. Occasionally, instead of writing letters, readers would call up with their questions, and the receptionist would send those calls over to me. Once I got a call from a reader interested in an article Parade had run about a female arm wrestler. He seemed very anxious to get in touch with the woman in the article, and when I mentioned in the course of our conversation that I myself happened to be a very good arm wrestler and that I'd beaten many men, he shifted his focus to me and continued to call for the duration of my stay there. My health insurance wasn't scheduled to go into effect until 3 months after I started working at Parade. And after I had been at the job for 3 months on the dot, my parents took me to see my father's urologist, who, when he came out of his office to fetch me, announced to the waiting room, "Who would have thought such a beautiful girl would have such rotten insides?" Although men were always telling me I was beautiful, I never got tired of hearing it, and that was all I heard. But the rotten insides part registered with my mother, and she had a big fight with my father about it on the car going home. "What kind of a doctor would say a thing like that?" she exclaimed. My father sat quietly, gripping the steering wheel, as she went on and on about what a crass idiot the doctor was. She ended by accusing him of feeling a loyalty to his urologist that superseded his loyalty to his own daughter. It bothered me to see this weakness in my father. It was, I realized years later, the same weakness that had kept him tied to the same job for 35 years and allowed him to put up with my mother's endless fits of anger and abuse. "We have to get a second opinion," my mother said. "I don't want that lout taking out Maisie's kidney." The idea that I might end up not having the operation disappointed me, because I had kind of been looking forward to having my kidney removed. I wanted to have a scar. I wanted to have physical proof that I suffered. The possibility that I might die during the operation also appealed to me. I enjoyed thinking about my funeral and imagining the eulogies and the tears.
I really enjoyed that. In particular, a few things really stuck out. First of all, when you said youth is something to be ashamed of and to be as disposed of as soon as possible, I absolutely remember feeling that from time to time when I was young too. Bumping up against the old people world.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I could also totally relate to that feeling, especially young as you were, about sort of, imagining your funeral and wanting to have that sort of physical proof that you had suffered. I liked the way you said that a lot.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, it's funny. It's funny, like the way that is. It's a terrible thing, and I don't know how people do it. I guess it takes a certain kind of person, and not a writer kind of person, to make it in the world of work, right?
Perhaps, yeah. Well, so tell us all where our listeners can find more about you and more where they can find your book.
Okay, well, I have a list. Amazon, but if you're against Amazon, all the links to the book are on my website, MaxineRosaler.com. And I also have another website called The Missing Kidney Rosaler .com. And it's around bookstores all over the country, I believe. And I really love for people to read it and to hear from them. And so far, I have to say that everyone loves this book, and that means a lot to me. And really, that's kind of all I need.
Yeah,
one reader at a time, right?
that's right.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's the way it works. And we'll drop the links down to your sites in the show notes for this episode. So at this time, I want to thank Maxine for coming on and introducing everybody to The Missing Kidney and Other Stories. You heard the excerpt? You got to check that out because that was just a snippet. Oh my word, we're in for a ride. I want to thank everybody out there for hanging out with us in the Midwest Writers Room today. I'm Ken Humphrey.
And I'm Luella Schmidt. Words ignite imaginations and spark change. Never underestimate the power of storytelling.
Midwest Writers Room is a production of the Wisconsin Writers Association. Writing and editing by Luella Schmidt and Ken Humphrey. Sound design and editing by Ken Humphrey. Music for the Midwest Writers Room was written by Michael Ramirez C. For more information, please visit wiwrite.org/podcast. Thank you.